there is a brutal truth about money that most people never learn until it's already too late. Poverty is not simply a matter of low wages or bad luck. Poverty is the direct result of ignorance, of not knowing the hidden laws that govern wealth. You can work yourself to the bone, sweat through endless nights, outpace every co-worker at your job, and still remain broke. Why? Because as Machiavelli observed centuries ago, the game of power is not won by effort alone, but by those who see the rules invisible to others. And money, make no mistake, is nothing more than power in another form. Machiavelli would tell you that it is no accident that millions spend their entire lives trapped in financial chains. The game is structured this way. The sharp, the disciplined, the ruthless few, they rise. The rest, those who cling to illusions, remain pawns, condemned to fight over scraps. If you want to escape that fate, you cannot rely on luck, talent, or hope. You must master the rules, break them, and you will be punished. Obey them, and the world begins to bend in your favor. Today, we are exploring 10 of these rules so harsh and unapologetic that most people choose the comfort of ignorance rather than face them. Yet ignoring them is exactly why they stay broke. Let us begin with the first and most fundamental law. Wealth starts in the mind, not the wallet. Machiavelli understood that perception precedes reality. In The Prince, he wrote that men in general judge more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see, but few can feel. The poor judge money only by what they can touch in the present moment. They think of money as survival, something to spend quickly, just enough to escape today's hunger or today's bills. The wealthy see money differently. They see it as a weapon, a tool to shape the battlefield in their favor. If you treat money as food to be consumed, you will always be hungry. If you treat money as a soldier in your army, it multiplies, conquers, and returns with reinforcements. This is why two men can earn the exact same salary, say $50,000 a year, and end up with entirely different destinies. One spends as fast as he earns, constantly chasing the next indulgence. 10 years later, he is buried in debt, still a servant. The other directs his money as though commanding troops. He saves, invests, and builds. A decade later, he stands freer than most of his peers. The difference is not income. The difference is mindset. Ignore this truth, and you will remain a prisoner of your paycheck forever. The second rule follows naturally. Stop begging for permission. Look closely at those who never build wealth. You'll notice the same pattern. They live their entire lives waiting for a boss to give them a raise, waiting for the government to fix the economy, waiting for luck to change their circumstances. Machiavelli would sneer at this weakness. He wrote that fortune is a woman, and it is necessary, if you wish to master her, to conquer her by force. Power is never given, it is seized. The same is true of money. If your success depends on another man's approval, you have already placed chains on your own wrists. Think of the modern entrepreneur who started with nothing but refused to ask for permission. Elon Musk didn't wait for governments or automakers to bless his vision. He forced Tesla into existence and bent industries to follow him. Jeff Bezos didn't wait for the retail giants to give him a chance. He created Amazon from a garage and reshaped commerce itself. They did not ask, they engineered. The poor complain about low wages. The rich build something that makes them too valuable to ignore. Every time you wait for approval, you hand control of your destiny to another. And control, as Machiavelli insisted, is the very foundation of power and survival. But seizing control comes with a price, and that price leads us to the third law. Master the art of sacrifice. This is where most people falter, because it requires confronting discomfort. The poor mindset is addicted to ease, new gadgets, weekend indulgences, endless entertainment. The wealthy mindset knows that empires are not built on comfort, but on strategic deprivation. Machiavelli counseled rulers that a prince must learn to renounce pleasures to secure his state. Every ruler in history who squandered his treasury on luxuries soon lost his throne. The same applies to your financial life. Every dollar wasted on impulse is a soldier lost in battle. Every sacrifice made, skipping pleasures, resisting waste, investing instead of consuming, multiplies your army. The man who spends $300 on shoes has gained nothing. The man who invests $300 in assets has planted seeds for the future. The poor stay broke not because they lack income, but because they lack the courage to endure discomfort. The wealthy embrace discomfort as a weapon. They delay gratification, knowing that the feast comes later, and it comes greater. History proves this law. Consider the Rockefeller dynasty. John D. Rockefeller lived modestly in his early years, saving every dollar he could, while his peers indulged in frivolities. Those sacrifices compounded into the greatest oil empire the world had ever seen. Or look at modern athletes who earn millions but bankrupt themselves with cars, jewelry, and entourages. Comfort destroyed them, while discipline created dynasties. The pattern has not changed in centuries. Sacrifice is the bridge between poverty and power. And yet, these first three rules, mindset, control, sacrifice, are only the foundation. Machiavelli knew that power is never maintained by effort alone. It is secured by leverage, influence, and the ability to manipulate appearances. And this is where the next laws of wealth take us, into the deeper mechanics of how elites bend reality itself. Because the truth is, hard work without leverage will grind you into dust, and appearances, how others see you, can be more decisive than the reality of your bank account. If you want to understand why so many remain trapped despite their sweat and struggle, and why so few rise, you must see how leverage and perception create the architecture of wealth and power. And that is where we turn next. Hard work is praised by the masses because it keeps them docile. The truth, however, is that no man rises to power or wealth through labor alone. Machiavelli never suggested a prince should fight battles with his own hands. He wrote that a ruler conquers through his armies, his ministers, his alliances, tools that extend his reach beyond his own body. Wealth follows the same principle. If you cling only to labor, you have already accepted chains. The fourth law of wealth is this: build leverage, not labor. Leverage is the ability to multiply your effort without multiplying your hours. Consider Jeff Bezos. He owns only a small fraction of Amazon, yet his influence over global commerce dwarfs men who work twice as hard and own everything they touch. Elon Musk can move markets with a single statement. Do you think these men succeed because they work longer hours than a construction worker sweating in the sun? Of course not. They succeed because they built machines, systems, and teams that work even while they sleep. One man with leverage can command the efforts of thousands. One man without it will exhaust himself until his body breaks. The poor cling to labor because it feels virtuous. They believe, if I work harder, I'll get further. But harder does not mean richer. Smarter does. Machiavelli warned that a prince who tries to win battles with his bare hands will soon fall to one who commands armies. The same applies to money. Ignore leverage, and you will die in the grind, discarded the moment you can no longer perform. Build leverage, and the world begins working for you. Yet leverage alone is not enough. Power, Machiavelli observed, is as much about perception as reality. He wrote that men in general judge more by the eye than the hand, and that rulers survive not by virtue alone, but by how they are seen. This is the fifth law: control your narrative. In the world of wealth, your reputation is more valuable than your income. People trust stories more than numbers. They decide opportunities based not on your bank account, but on the image you project. Take Steve Jobs. When Apple was on the verge of collapse in the late 1990s, he returned not only with new products, but with a story. He presented himself as a visionary, a man capable of creating 1,000 songs in your pocket. That story rebuilt confidence, attracted investors, and eventually reshaped the entire tech industry. Or consider John D. Rockefeller. He cultivated the image of a benevolent philanthropist while simultaneously building a monopoly that crushed competitors. His fortune grew not just from oil, but from how people perceived him. Weak rulers lose their kingdoms because they appear indecisive. Weak men lose opportunities because they appear unreliable. Think about it. The man who shows up late, dresses carelessly, and constantly complains will never be trusted with greater opportunities, no matter how much money he makes. The man who shows up sharp, speaks with conviction, and carries himself with discipline attracts wealth naturally. Your reputation is a form of currency. Doors open when people believe you are competent, reliable, and strong. They slam shut when you appear desperate or careless. Control your narrative, and you create momentum. Lose control of it, and you will find yourself invisible when opportunity passes. But what if you do everything right? Work strategically, build a brand, construct leverage, and still find yourself at a disadvantage? That brings us to the sixth law. Understand the game is rigged. Here is where many break down because they cling to the childish belief that the world is fair. Machiavelli never entertained such illusions. He wrote that, "Men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who deceives will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. Power has always bent the rules in its favor. Why would wealth be any different? Look around. The wealthy pay less in taxes proportionally than the working class. They hire entire armies of accountants and lawyers to navigate loopholes written for their advantage. They lobby governments, shape laws, and bend institutions to protect themselves. And the poor? They complain. They curse the unfairness of it all. But complaining changes nothing. Strategy does. You can either study the game as it is or remain a pawn in someone else's. The rich play with insider knowledge, alliances, and laws that most people don't even know exist. The poor play blindfolded. Consider the Panama Papers, which revealed how billionaires hid fortunes in offshore accounts, while average workers paid every cent in taxes. The public was outraged for a few days, then returned to work. Meanwhile, the wealthy carried on, unscathed. That is Machiavelli's realism in action. The strong will always exploit the weak who refuse to learn. If you do not study the tax code, build networks, or position yourself strategically, you will always pay for someone else's victory. The lesson is simple. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as intended, for those who designed it. You cannot cry your way to fairness. You must outthink, outmaneuver, and outplay. That is the Machiavellian way. You either master the rigged game or you remain a victim of it. And here lies the pivot. We have covered the architecture of power, leverage, perception, and system mastery. These are the tools that elevate men beyond ordinary labor. But even these are fragile if you remain dependent, if you chase appearances, or if you lack discipline. The next laws of wealth expose the chains that keep people enslaved and the habits that guarantee poverty no matter how much money passes through their hands. Because the truth is, even those who understand leverage and perception often collapse under the weight of dependence, addiction to consumption, or lack of self-control. And that is where we must go next. Into the psychology of dependence, the illusion of wealth built on appearances, and the ruthless discipline required to break free. Dependency is the most common illusion of security. A man may think himself safe because he has a steady job, but in truth, he is fragile. This brings us to the seventh law. Never depend on a single source. Machiavelli warned princes never to rely on mercenaries or auxiliaries because they were unreliable and could turn on their masters at the worst moment. The same law applies to money. If your entire income comes from one paycheck, your fortune rests on another man's decision. Lose that job and your whole foundation collapses overnight. That is not stability, that is slavery. The elite understand this well. They build multiple streams of income like rivers feeding into the same ocean. Real estate, investments, businesses, royalties, intellectual property. If one stream dries up, the others keep flowing. In the 2008 financial crisis, millions lost jobs and were ruined because they had only one source of income. Meanwhile, the wealthy with diverse holdings shifted capital, moved into safer assets, and emerged stronger. A man with one master is always vulnerable. A man with many allies can survive storms. The same is true for wealth. Depend on one source and you are doomed to fragility. Build many and you are fortified against collapse. But even with multiple streams, most people sabotage themselves with the eighth law. Avoid the trap of endless consumption. We live in a society that celebrates loud wealth, flashy cars, designer clothes, extravagant vacations. Yet Machiavelli would laugh at such displays, for he knew rulers who indulged in appearances often lost their kingdoms quickly. Real wealth is quiet, fake wealth is loud. The poor stay broke because they want to look rich before they are rich. They take loans to impress neighbors, drown themselves in credit card debt, and starve their future for the illusion of status today. History is littered with such examples. Consider the countless athletes and entertainers who earned millions only to end up bankrupt. They chased appearances, not assets. Contrast that with Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, who lived for decades in the same modest home he bought in the 1950s. His fortune was not built on consumption, but on discipline and compounding assets. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler who wastes resources to appear strong will soon invite invasion. The same is true for money. The man who spends to look rich is easy prey. The man who invests silently grows unassailable. This brings us to the ninth law: learn ruthless discipline. Wealth is not built in weeks, it is built in decades. Machiavelli knew that a kingdom was secured by walls laid brick by brick, not by sudden bursts of effort. He admired rulers who could endure the long game, who did not chase fortune's sudden gifts, but fortified themselves with patience. Wealth requires the same. The poor chase shortcuts, lottery tickets, get-rich schemes, speculative bubbles. They win briefly, lose quickly, and return to the grind. The rich are different. They are consistent. They save, invest, build, repeat. Their habits compound silently until one day they wake up owning empires. Look at Buffett again. He built his fortune not through miracles, but through relentless discipline, investing patiently for decades. Or think of the Rothschilds, who quietly compounded wealth across generations, never rushing, never seeking glory in the moment. Discipline is the unseen engine of dynasties. Without it, no fortune lasts. With it, even modest beginnings can grow into power that endures centuries. Machiavelli would say a prince who fails to secure his defenses day after day is a prince who invites ruin. A man who fails to build disciplined habits invites poverty to reclaim him, no matter how much money he briefly touches. And here is the harsh truth most ignore. Discipline is not glamorous. It is routine, repetition, self-denial, and patience. That is why most people never acquire it. They prefer excitement, entertainment, indulgence. But discipline is the difference between building a fortress and building a tent. When storms come, only the fortress stands. Ignore this law and you will forever be tossed about by fortune. Embrace it and you build something no storm can tear down. Now we reach the edge of the final truth. You may adopt the right mindset, seize control without permission, embrace sacrifice, build leverage, master perception. Study the rigged game, diversify your streams, resist consumption, and even cultivate discipline. And yet, without one final principle, all of it remains fragile. For money, no matter how vast, is vulnerable unless it is shielded by power. This last law, Machiavelli's harshest lesson, explains why fortunes without defenses crumble, and why empires without strength fall to stronger hands. And that is where we go next, into the final law, where wealth and power become inseparable, and why those who fail to fortify their riches are destined to lose them. We arrive at the most brutal of all Machiavelli's laws of wealth. Power protects wealth. Money without power is fragile, like a castle without walls. If you accumulate riches but fail to defend them, stronger forces will strip them away. Machiavelli wrote that a prince who cannot defend his state will inevitably lose it, no matter how much fortune he has. Wealth is no different. A man with money but no defenses is merely storing treasure for someone else to seize. Consider the fate of lottery winners. They receive sudden fortunes, but within years, most are broke. Why? Because they had money, but no power, no legal protections, no influence, no strategy. They were thrust into the role of prince without the wisdom to govern, and fortune reclaimed everything. By contrast, the great dynasties of history, the Medici, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, did not simply build wealth. They built fortresses around it. They established banks, trusts, legal systems, and political influence that ensured their riches endured. Money alone can be stolen. Power makes it untouchable. This is why the elite do not merely accumulate, they shield. They form alliances, hire lawyers, create corporations, and cultivate influence. They protect their wealth through laws written in their favor and networks that guard their interests. The poor believe money alone is enough. The rich know that wealth without shields is an invitation for predators. If you want lasting wealth, you must build defenses, contracts, structures, alliances, reputation. These are the walls of your financial kingdom, and this truth extends into the bonus laws that the masses never hear. The first is to think generationally, not daily. Machiavelli advised rulers to plan beyond their lifetimes, securing their dynasty rather than indulging in present desires. The broke mindset asks, "What can I get today?" The wealthy mindset asks, "What seeds can I plant that will feed my heirs for decades?" If all you think about is surviving until Friday, you remain trapped on the treadmill forever. But if you think in decades, if you build assets that last beyond your years, you escape the cycle. This is why dynasties endure while individuals perish. Generational thinking transforms wealth into legacy. The second bonus law is to move in silence. Machiavelli wrote that the wise prince hides his intentions until the time is right. The same applies to wealth. Do not broadcast your plans. Do not reveal your moves. Do not flaunt your progress. When you brag, you invite envy, sabotage, and competition. Silence protects you. It allows you to build without interference and makes your success appear sudden, even shocking. The loudest people are often the weakest. The true architects of wealth build in the shadows, revealing only what they must. When they finally emerge, their position is unassailable, and by then, it is too late for rivals to resist. Wealth loves mystery. Guard your plans and let your results speak. The third and final bonus law is this: control yourself before you control money. Machiavelli warned that a ruler who cannot govern his own impulses will inevitably lose control of his state. The same applies to you. If you cannot control your spending, your desires, your distractions, then no amount of money will save you. Wealth requires self-mastery. The poor spend first and regret later. The wealthy build first and celebrate later. Discipline of the self is the foundation of every other law. Without it, fortune will slip through your fingers no matter how much you earn. With it, you are untouchable because no external force can exploit your weakness. Now, let us gather the threads. The 10 Machiavellian laws of wealth are not suggestions. They are laws of survival. Wealth begins in the mind, not the wallet. You must stop begging for permission and seize control. You must sacrifice comfort to secure power. You must build leverage instead of relying on labor. You must master your narrative, for perception opens doors that numbers alone cannot. You must accept that the game is rigged and learn to play it. You must never depend on a single source, for dependence is fragility. You must resist endless consumption, for appearance without assets is ruin. You must cultivate ruthless discipline, for empires are built brick by brick. And above all, you must shield your wealth with power, for money without defense is already lost. Ignore these laws and you will remain broke, not because life is unfair, but because you refuse to see. Follow them, and you begin to carve a path toward wealth and freedom that most men can only dream of. But remember this: knowing is not enough. Machiavelli never wrote for the weak. He wrote for those willing to act. You cannot treat these laws as entertainment. They are weapons. If you do not wield them, they rust uselessly while others conquer. The choice is in front of you. Continue playing blind, or begin playing like a strategist. Machiavelli gave the map centuries ago. The wealthy still use it. The only question is, will you? Or will you remain a pawn in a game designed by those who have already mastered it? The laws will not change. The only thing that changes is whether you rise to meet them.